Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our special event on how to eliminate inefficiencies in your IT organizations with DevOps. I'm very excited to bring you this special presentation on behalf of Vivid, and I can't wait to get started. We have some excellent speakers today, and I believe that you'll find it very helpful. So let's get started. So, as I mentioned, our webinar today is sponsored by your DevOps SIG leaders. This is a brand new leadership team. I have the pleasure of working with Ron Franklin and Francesco Colavita. My name is Saeed Hussain. I'm the principal architect at Adarsa Services. My career has been as an automation architect. I'm experienced in planning and execution of development and operations of secure, lean, and rapid software delivery of enterprise applications for the public and private sector. Ron, why don't you please introduce yourself and give a little background as well?
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Ron Franklin. I'm principal architect at Diversant, and I've been around for quite a few years here. And I've been working primarily with providing solutions for Fortune 500 and Global 100 businesses, primarily in the areas of performance engineering, DevOps, and operations. And I'm excited to be part of this group. Francesco?
Yeah, it's Francesco Colavita, and I work in Micro Focus. And in the last 5 years, I'm following in this company, before it was HPE, the DevOps implementation for our customer. So what I basically do is have the customer to move the first very step to this transformation. We start with some workshop with them, and then I have the professional services organization in my company to implement the transformation with the customer. So I saw a lot of company starting with this DevOps, and I'm proud to be part of this SIG. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that wonderful introduction. And as I've mentioned, we are a brand new leadership team trying to bring you the latest content for DevOps through our Vivid worldwide group. If you're not already a DevOps SIG member, please join so you could stay informed on our latest upcoming events. And we'll be bringing you some fresh content on tools, on culture, on process, and how to overcome challenges, so you could also get started with DevOps if you haven't already done so. For today's webinar, we have a very special guest that will be joining us. To that slide, so we have Gary Gruber. Gary is a very experienced consultant. He runs workshops with large organizations and helps them transform their software development and delivery processes. Hi, Gary. Why don't you go ahead and give us a brief introduction so everyone can know what you're up to. Hi, Gary. Can you hear us?
Gary, you might have muted.
This will be better off of mute. Sorry about that.
Hey, Gary.
Gary Gruber. Hi, Gary Gruber here. I started my journey on DevOps over a decade ago, before it was really invented, when I was trying to transform how we did software development at HP for the LaserJet business. I've written several books in this space because it had such an effect on how the business results that were there and taking inefficiencies out of our software development delivery processes. I continue to write books and trying to help as many people as I can because of the impact I've seen it have on businesses. And currently I spend a lot of time out in organizations doing workshops, helping them come up with their DevOps plans and helping coaching them along the term.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, Gary. And as Gary mentioned, he has authored a couple of wonderful books. I have actually, been a fan of Gary and see have myself seen a lot of value by implementing some of the best practices that I have learned from reading some of his books. So really, glad you were able to join today and share some of your insight with our community. So thank you once again. So we'll get started. Before we get started, I wanted to just go over some webinar housekeeping rules. So again, today's live session is intended for all Vivid members, and the recording will be posted in a webinar section on the Vivid website, which will be available for all members. Additionally, the slide deck and the webinar recording will be made available to you. We'll send you the link via email once they are posted to the Vivid website. Another pointer is that if you want to enlarge the presentation pane on your screen, just click on the rectangle on the upper right-hand corner of the presentation pane being pointed to by the red arrow. So other than that, if you have any questions as we go along, please type them in and send them in using the Q&A pane on the left side of your screen. Simply type in your question and then click on the Ask button. If you want to ask a question and receive them in your native language, click on the flag on the upper left corner of your screen, which will launch a language selector box. Next, click on the radio button next to your language, and then click on Apply, and you're all set. So without further ado, let's get started, and we'll jump into our first question, which is, how do you define DevOps? And Gary, I'm going to pass this question to you. What's your definition of DevOps?
Well, I think this is a good place to start because everybody starts focusing on the practices and they're all over the place, and you get I go into companies that have a lot of different opinions. I tend to start with Gene Kim's definitions. It's all about outcomes, and it's the technology, it's the processes, it's the cultural changes that enable you to release on a more frequent basis while enabling all aspects of quality. And I think if you start with that foundation, it gives you the ability to get everybody on the same page, as opposed to starting with the rituals or the practices, and then there's a lot of different views depending on what type of environment you're in. So I always like to start with that principle.
Wonderful. And that makes absolute sense. I mean, Francesco, what's your thoughts on this? How do you define DevOps?
Yeah, I believe that as we have now, there are a lot of definition of DevOps, but at the end of the story, we have to implement the efficiency of the software development life cycle for the company. So we can conjugate it, but I believe that the key words of DevOps is a question of collaboration, a different way to work for the company. There are no big changes if we analyze in detail what is the transformation, but some change that is really related to collaboration. That's why the organization is a crucial part of the DevOps transformation in my view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's not just about throwing a specific tool at the problem, but you kind of have to have that communication and collaboration and have the right process and to get that change in your organization. So, Ron, what's your thoughts on this? What's your definition of DevOps?
Yeah, I just see it as just kind of a standardization and kind of an implementation of an automation of ITIL processes, and also just kind of a culture shift to bring the different groups to work together so that you can automate and take out some of those inefficiencies from the groups and get a clear and consistent product.
That makes sense. It sounds like implementing change, you're always going to face some type of a challenge, which kind of brings us to the next question, which is, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges for implementing DevOps? I'll give that, we'll start off with you, Gary. What do you think?
I think the biggest thing is getting everybody on the same page for where to start, and starting where you start depends on where your biggest inefficiencies are. And so I tend to start off by getting a map of the deployment pipeline and getting everybody in a room to review it, see what the opportunities are, and understand practices that would help that the most. And then once you get that is finding the capacity to invest in sharpening the saw. So many organizations are booked to 150%. That even when they see they've got inefficiencies and they see they've got to fix it, they get so sucked into their day jobs of just fighting the battle that they don't really get an opportunity to step back and invest in making their life better in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And as far as, you know, the team sizes, so when you say get everyone in a room, is there any specific person and, you know, management? Are we talking engineers, the size of the teams, and any insight you could provide from your experience with all the work you have done so far?
Well, you know, I think of this as a deployment pipeline, and a deployment pipeline involves code that has to be developed, qualified, and released as a system. And if you're lucky enough to have a loosely coupled system and teams of 5 to 10 can independently develop, qualify, and deploy the code, I think you're going to take one approach. If you've got a large enterprise with a tightly coupled system where hundreds of people have to work together to develop, qualify, and deploy the code, then I think you need to get the leadership of that team that has to integrate their work together, and that's the technical leadership and the managerial leadership to get on the same page as to where the inefficiencies are and what they're going to go after to fix.
That makes sense. And Francesco, I mean, you're dealing with so many large businesses as you're consulting them and going through this journey. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges for implementing DevOps, other than what, you know, Gary has already said?
Yeah, thanks. I saw that, as usual, the biggest challenges is the resistance of people to change the model they use every day to do their daily job. In fact, with DevOps, they have to start working in a different way, and perhaps they are scared to change something that they don't know where they are going. So the first thing that we have to do when we start this transformation is to ensure the people that with this change they will not have a large impact. And as Gary said, we need, when we have a big group of people that has to work together, of course we need even some tools that can help to collaborate, that can help to share information in a better way, and even to make as much as automation possible to facilitate the daily job of every person. But the biggest challenge that I saw really is the resistance to the change that the people we have as person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, resistance is very hard to overcome, and especially when it's a larger enterprise, and it's just very hard to drive that type of change. So as far as resistance, Ron, do you have anything you could add to that? Is that something that you could also relate to? Have you seen any of that in your organization?
Yeah, I think the people aspect is the one where you have the biggest challenge, because as far as with tools, you know, it's just basically it's fairly easy to connect them, but you're talking about a change in culture and a change in definition of people's jobs and what they're doing, and so a lot of people, you know, they're a little bit uncomfortable with change. So I think a lot of planning at the beginning and just communication and just letting people know what the changes are and what to expect can alleviate and overcome some of those concerns and challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In fact, regarding the communication, I saw a lot of companies that in parallel with this DevOps transformation, they are starting to making some workshop or training in communication skill, like storytelling skill or really communication training to a group of people to better communicate between each other, especially for large organizations. Absolutely, and I could imagine, you know, having
smaller teams where you have less lines of communication, it would be easier to implement that change. But you're not always, lucky to have that type of organization structure. So that kind of brings us to our next question. And I'm gonna move the slide, and then Gary, as far as architecture, how do you see architecture impacting how you implement DevOps? Do you see that it could benefit in how the teams are structured as well, and which aligns with the architecture?
Yeah, as I said before, I see two different things. One is loosely coupled systems where you have small teams, and it's all about empowering them, removing roadblocks, and having more generalists. They can own the value all the way from the business idea to effectively working in operations, and you need those operations capabilities and then the ownership end to end. If you've got a large, tightly coupled system, I think you need to design and implement a well-structured deployment pipeline that moves everything all the way from a check-in into production, following various quality gates where you're using automated tests to gate different applications and different codes from working down the path of the deployment pipeline in towards production. And those are the types of DevOps is about coordinating work across people, and the types of things you do to coordinate the work across 5 people is very different from the types of things you do to coordinate the work across 500. And I think that's kind of what's missing in the industry is everybody assumes those things are the same. And we started learning from those loosely coupled organizations. And as we try to take this into large, tightly coupled organizations, we're trying to take the same approach. And what I tried to lay out in my latest book, Starting and Scaling DevOps in Enterprise, that's available on my website, is there's a different approach for large things, and you need to break it into subsystems and build it into a stable, releasable system. And that has a huge, architecture has a huge impact on how you go after that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that answer. And I know, Francesco, you kind of already touched a little bit on that. How do you have effective communication, and what tools, and how do you get continuous feedback and automation as part of it as well? So how do you see architecture impacting how you implement DevOps and success rates?
So I believe that to implement DevOps, you need an architecture impact. But in any case, in this world, I think it's impossible to don't have any architectural change because the world is changing so fast. We have cloud, we have now the containers, and all the tools that evolve every single day. So with or without DevOps, the people, they are obliged to be impacted by the new architecture that comes every single day. Of course, with DevOps, this is a must. You have to change the architecture of the tools or of the processes that the company they use. But I believe that the people is used to change this type of behavior and even the tool that they have to use. Of course, one of the very new things is that the final customer, the final user is crucial. So the new thing that we see in the architecture is the customer feedback that became every day much more important for the business. And so the monitoring of the application in production, the understanding of the behavior of the application in a proactive mode is something that is really changing the architecture, the way that the people is using this new information on the tools.
And as far as to Gary's point, what challenges do you see when you have tightly coupled systems, and how successful you're with trying to implement DevOps practice in a larger team that's supporting a tightly coupled system as opposed to a more loosely coupled system, which might have smaller teams and it's easier to communicate those changes? And any insight or thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course, for the small teams, everything is much easier. When you have the biggest team, I saw that there are some DevOps special silos that the company they start to create to facilitate this transformation. So what happened? For the biggest team, what I see in my experience is that the large company they create a specific DevOps team that can facilitate all of this. Otherwise, it's very, very hard. You need someone that has the responsibility to facilitate this transformation and the impact that this large team can have.
So are you recommending having like a separate DevOps special team that could help with that implementation that's dedicated to these DevOps practices, or?
This is a tricky question.
Yeah,
we will see. Yeah, because
sorry to put you on the spot, but
no. It's but it's easy to answer because we know, all of us, we know that we work in DevOps, that the DevOps wants to break the silos. But if we create another team, this is another silos that we want to work with. So how can we solve? But I saw some company that adopted this solution. The important is that these silos must be a silo that is like an enzyme in a chemical reaction. So they have to facilitate the transformation at the beginning of the reactions, at the beginning of the transformation, and they have to help the different parts to talk each other, to link each other, because they have to react with this new architecture, with this new methodology that the company is putting in art. But the most important part is that this team must be aware that after the reaction, after the transformation, they have to disappear. So it's just a transactional team that some company can create. But really, again, only for the big company, and the big company that they want to adopt the big bang approach of the DevOps transformation, because you can even use another approach that is think big and start small, that we can even talk later in the discussion.
All right, thank you very much. Ron, any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
on architecture impacting?
Yeah, that's one of the things I see as a strength of DevOps is just because of, like with build pipelines, it can support the architecture of the various organizations that utilize it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And it allows organizations, if they need to, to use a baseball analogy, they can go for the base hits rather than having to hit the home run. So they can implement it a section at a time. And I think that's one of the beauties of the whole DevOps process is that it's amenable to the various architectures of the organizations.
Thank you. And as far as I know, your background is in operations, and you collect a lot of production feedback. How do you bring that feedback loop back to the development team? And where does that fit into the architecture?
Yeah, that's part of where you do that continual process improvement. So that's as it's moving further back, you use that feedback loop. Maybe some of it's in terms of trend, and this may be as we get into metrics, maybe some of the trending metrics that you get, or some of the alert distributions that you get. Where are we seeing the most errors? Where are we seeing the system being more error prone? And then you use that feedback loop to go to the developers to say, hey, this might be an area we might want to look at improving or tune up, or it may not just be the developers, it may be your systems folks or your server group or your network group. Interesting.
So that was a really good understanding from all aspects from you gentlemen on the architecture side of things. I couldn't agree more on the challenges you face with the different types of architecture, and then also how you have to adapt it depending on the various environments, sizes of teams, and the types of teams that you need to get involved. So we'll jump into the next question for the panel. So, and we'll change this up a little bit. We'll start with Francesco. So in your DevOps implementation experience, what is the impact on organizations that decide to start this transformation? So I'm sure you have seen, work with many businesses and help them start this journey. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in fact, I had the opportunity in my career to help many customers to start and even then to move the next steps to this transformation. And to answer to this question, I would like to make a syllogism with the football team. When we think to a football team, every time that they have to play with a different team or in an important game, they don't have to change the people. So in this transformation, any company will change any person. They will not throw out anyone on the organization. They say, I don't need you anymore. The important is that sometimes this team, they have to change the rules of someone. For example, someone has to play a different game or a different position, just to do something new for him. And this is what we mentioned in the first question. The challenge is the resistance to the change. But this is something that is strictly necessary. So this is what I see. As in any team, in each important match, they want to change the way they collaborate. In fact, if we see the preparation of this team, they see that they study the schema, how they have to afford this new match. And this is exactly what happened in a company when they have to start this DevOps transformation. They create a different collaboration system. So we see that, for example, there are sometimes I saw that one of the initiatives that the company they put in place during this transformation is something very, very easy. They organize, they schedule a meeting every 15 days or every month between operation people and dev people. This never happened before. And it's not a very impact transformation that don't impact a lot the company, but really facilitate the way that the application will be monitoring in production. And just to give you an example, in one of the very, very big customers in Europe, I was delivering a workshop and I discovered that the people that were developing this application, they didn't know absolutely anything about how the application was monitored in production. And with a few meetings between the production team and the development team, they discovered that a few lines of code could really help to understand some very important problem in that application. So this is just an example of how small change in the same team can really optimize an important flow. Then there is another example. There are some companies that are starting involving quality assurance people. There are some companies, they have the Center of Excellence to make the quality assurance phase. They are involving one or two people from the quality assurance team, and they put these people in the agile team, because these people that work in the quality assurance, they know very well the tool, they know very well the quality assurance process, so they can help from the very beginning to improve the quality of the application. It's another minor change that can really help. But if we really want to see the real change in the organization that I saw in my experience is a new role that is appearing, that is the application architect. What is the application architect? Is a person that is responsible overall of the application, and during the development of the application, he has the responsibility to talk with all the rooms of the houses. So he has to talk with the development, the quality assurance, the operation, and try to understand which are the problems, to facilitate the communication and even to define the different architecture that the application must have in the different phases. Like, for example, in the development, the application will need probably one laptop for the developer and a few servers, but in the quality assurance, a different architecture, and in production, a new one. So this person must decide all these things to facilitate the process. And as I mentioned, even the change that I see from the Center of Excellence, that some people are now moved in the agile teams.
Thank you for that valuable insight and that interesting analogy of a football team. And you know, that was really well put. And so when you consider that, and when you the quality, the couple examples you gave, it kind of sounds like, you know, in order you need to have that communication, whether you have that single application architect who needs to understand the needs of you know, the developer, the quality assurance, the operations team, and then understand what technology needs to go where and how it fits from, you know, automation within, you know, testing, or automation within infrastructure deployment or monitoring. So it sounds like that person could, you know, facilitate some of that communication, and then being part of that communication could drive a lot of that change.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And this is a new role that few companies they had before.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Gary, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I found that DevOps, when you really try to increase that frequency, is a forcing function that requires you to fix issues that have been existing in your organization for years. When you're doing things on a low frequency, your organization's not seeing the issues repeat, and they're able to brute force and muscle their way through the issues on an ongoing basis. When you start increasing that frequency, you've got to fix it once and for all. And the good news is there's a lot of new approaches and technologies out there that enable you to go to containers or different things to really fix these issues. And when you start increasing the frequency, you're required to. So I think it's the forcing function that fixes inefficiencies that have been in your organization for years.
Fantastic. Ron, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking back when I worked for a channel partner, and one of my clients there, they had implemented it, and they were able, in terms of frequency, they were doing over 100 plus builds a day, and so they were excited because they could get those changes out to the customer faster. They could find any defects, and they could fix anything that needed to be in a much quicker fashion, and provide higher quality, more consistent, reproducible software.
And it makes the triage process so much easier because there's fewer changes between feedback cycles. So you know if something changed or the quality went down, you don't have to go through who did what in the last 3 months. You're able to figure out who did what in the release this morning at 7 o'clock.
Right. So it sounds like, you know, it's communication and the feedback loop is shorter because of those higher frequency builds, and you know, it just seems like you're shifting more left and focusing on how do you deliver more and finding those defects earlier and quicker, and fixing them once and for all, as Gary said.
Yeah, it's like I say, test early, test often.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on to our next question, and this is for Francesco. You know, do you see the need to have a DevOps dedicated team to start the DevOps journey in the enterprise, or are there other solutions adopted? I know we touched on this a little bit in your previous answers, but what you know, anything else you want to add to this?
Yes. We already mentioned this, and as I told, I saw some company that they created this team, but really I saw this attitude years ago. Now it seems that it's disappearing because a lot of companies they use the motto "think big, start small." What does it mean? That they start this DevOps transformation pointing to the very crucial services, crucial for the business, services. So they start to adopt DevOps to implement in a faster way to do the shifting left and all the adopt all the changes that DevOps suggest for the crucial services for the business. What does it mean think big? Because you before to do this first step with that specific application, you have to create the big picture. I mean, you need to create the roadmap to really understand where you want to go with your company in 1 or 2 years, and which are the benefits that you want to reach, which are the processes that you want to change, and all the impact. But then in this roadmap, you have to put in order the project that they have the biggest impact in terms of business return on investment that you can have. So what I saw in my experience in the last year is that there's a big approach with the dedicated team that study all the processes that they want to change, define all the process on paper, and then define perfectly the new world before to start, it disappears. The DevOps transformation is moving in the agile way. They start with a specific service before they study the roadmap. And when they have everything clear, they try to succeed with this service, and then they do this analysis again in the agile way to see if they can improve much better in the next service that they want to put. So, yes, there are some companies that are doing that, not now, in the past year, but some of them they succeeded, but it was a very, very big effort.
Gary, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends, again, on architecture. If you've got a small team, then they should be able to figure out this piece. You may want to have a centralized group somewhere that is experts in the tools, whether it's containers or your deployment automation or your infrastructure as code or test automation that can help those teams so that not everybody has to go learn those tools on their own. But if it's a small team, you really want them owning it end to end. Now, if it's a large, tightly coupled system that requires coordinated work across hundreds of people, somebody needs to design that deployment pipeline, somebody needs to implement it, and somebody needs to maintain it. That could be the developers, that could be operations people, that could be the release team, that could be a DevOps team. I don't get too caught up in the names, but somebody's going to have to do that work, and somebody's going to have to make sure that you're continually improving that process.
So that's a really good point you bring up, and earlier you had mentioned that you noticed that organizations, the resources are 150% booked. That's somebody that's going to take ownership of this designing and implementing and maintaining this pipeline. Most frequently, in your experience, who do you usually see that steps forward or shows the most interest in getting this done? With the developers, testers, operations?
A lot of times it comes down to whoever's responsible for release, because right now they have to be the babysitters in the organizations because none of this is under version control. People are changing everything. It's uncoordinated. And people are either forming a DevOps team somewhere in the organization, say they want to do a transformation, or the people that are dealing with all the pain from it, which typically falls on the release team. You know, you got the developer saying, I just do my code, and you got operations people, I just make sure it runs. And somebody's got to pull all this together and put it together. And it's typically been the release part of your organization. And that's a thankless, difficult job. But they're not booked at 150%. They're usually swamped at like 250%. So frequently they don't have the bandwidth to pull their heads up and look at it. So I do see a lot of times that somebody's chartered with driving the DevOps transformation into an organization, and they start to hire people to help them, and it frequently becomes called a DevOps team.
Yeah, and if I can spend some words on this, in my experience, I saw. I agree with Gary. I saw that in a small team, very often the thing that pushes this transformation are the developers team and sometimes the quality assurance team, but much more the developers. Because they start working in agile, they want to move fast, and so they say, but we are blocked on the other steps that we have in the process, so they push the transformation. in the big team, sometimes there is the operational team that they have a lot of problems, so they try to use and push DevOps to solve these problems. But what I saw in this case is in some company is that they start to make the assessment, so to analyze the steps that they have to do to implement DevOps, and they immediately understand that the majority of the change is related to the first phases, that is development and quality assurance. So they understand that they need to involve the other team even in the assessment and the decision of how to start this transformation. Because operation, of course, they have a big benefit. They need to be sure that everything works better and faster, but they have to involve the other part of the house to start the DevOps transformation.
Yeah, I think, at the very least, you're going to need someone to be the champion, to be the conductor, depending on whether you have a team or you have the group take it on. Typically, I see a lot of development is where it starts driving. I had another client where, as they implemented DevOps, they actually found they could actually had cost savings because they could use a lower cost version of the development tool they were using, because they could push some of the things out into the build pipeline.
So it sounds like, there's different key stakeholders, and anyone could basically kick off that journey as long as, they see value and they want to, take ownership of that. Because I believe there's, I know we already discussed architecture in an earlier slide, but the interoperability is going to be key between these different tools and environments in order to plug into this, development pipeline and make sure you have the right feedback going into the right groups of team and as soon as possible. So thank you for that valuable insight. We'll move on to the next question. Just doing a time check. So how can the complex enterprises motivate the teams to experiment and adopt the new DevOps model? So, Francesco?
Yeah, as we saw in the first question, we saw that the biggest challenge that we have is the resistance to the change for the people behavior. So to facilitate this, I believe, and I even saw that a lot of companies, what they use something that can motivate the people to change. And what can motivate the people to change is when, this is even in our life, when we see someone that succeeds in something, we are motivated to copy or to make the same change that they did. So again, the start small approach, think big, start small, is something that I think is really a win approach, because I saw that in some implementation, some companies, they start to change and adopt DevOps for the strategic solution. They measured the business KPI at the beginning of the transformation. I give an example. The business KPI is, of course, one of the business KPI is the time to market. And the time to market depends from the time that you need to make the build, to make the new infrastructure. And with automation, you can reduce time to market a lot. So only with one example, but if you adopt all the suggestions that DevOps gives us, you can really reduce the time to market. So the other responsible of the other application, when they saw that with DevOps, this crucial application for the business reduced the time to market, they had a business impact, a quality impact. They are really motivated to better understand what this first team they did to have this success. So I believe that really the start small is something that really helps. And of course, you even have to address the right people that usually are the young people, because they are much more motivated to change.
Exactly. That's a really good point you bring up, that if you could baseline some of those KPIs and make it more measurable, and then when you're experimenting with the different, tools or processes, you see, that impact and it becomes clear if it's, any benefit to you or not. Gary, any thoughts on that? Gary, you might be on mute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, I tend to not start by doing DevOps or Agile or anything. I tend to start by talking to the leaders of the deployment pipeline about what their business objectives are. What about their software development process is not meeting their needs currently? And I start there, and then I try to map out their deployment pipeline and highlight the inefficiencies so that everybody in the organization can see the waste that exists and how it's getting between them and meeting their business objectives. And when you start that way, then you can start pulling the tools out of the DevOps toolbox that would best address the waste and inefficiencies that exist in the current process.
So you would take the top-down approach and trying to get management buy-in by showing the baseline metrics and then showing how they could improve. Is that what I'm hearing?
It depends on the size of the deployment pipeline. I'm not usually working with the loosely coupled organizations. Those are pretty straightforward and easy transformations. I'm usually working with the large tightly coupled. And if you're going to change things, it can't really work from the bottoms up in there, because if 9 out of 10 teams decide they're going to release code on a more frequent basis, and one of them decides they're going to be doing it the same old way, you can't release code on a more frequent basis because they're always breaking it. So you need to get the organizations that have to work together to agree to change together. And I think that starts with the leaders of that organization, because they're more likely to find the capacity for the change, and they're more likely to, get everybody to agree these are the things we're going to change. But once we've agreed these are the things we're going to change, it's not optional, right? This is what we're going to do. We said we're going to do it because these are the ways. And I think having them pull their teams together and review the waste, and the way I go about it, the approach I use is just starting the scaling DevOps and enterprise, which lays out exactly what I do when I go in and do workshops, and that captures the waste. The teams get together and review it, and they agree on the things they're trying to do. And, I go into organizations and I draw maps and I present methodologies that are used across the industry in a way to help the team come up with their plans. And I don't tell them what to do and I don't tell them how to do it, but I ask the questions that help them develop their plans, because I think if it's their plans, they'll own making it successful and they'll be motivated to make it work.
That makes sense. Ron, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I see that. Just one of the things with the DevOps models is one of the things that motivates the groups is that you can automate some of the more mundane tasks and move it out so that they can do provide more time and effort on the things to impact the enterprise. Also see it as a competitive differentiator within organizations, the ability to get your software to market faster, to have your software be more error-free, more consistent. And that goes a long ways out in the industry as people, as the perceptions to the organization itself.
Absolutely. And in respect of everyone's time, we're just going to quickly move over to the next question. And both Francesco and Gary, mentioned baselining KPIs and then, working with that using industry standard framework. So what are some key metrics? How do you measure DevOps? Gary?
I don't necessarily, I use metrics to tell me where to go have a conversation to figure out what's going on. I believe that too many people try to manage software by metrics, and tell me how you're going to measure me. I'll tell you how I'm going to play the game. And if you want to measure lines of code, I can copy and paste. If you want to do story points, I can break it down. It's really hard to measure, but you can create metrics to tell you where waste might exist in the organization. And, cycle time, Pareto chart. Take a QA environment and do a Pareto chart of run some automated tests. Make sure you have automated tests. Run them in that integrated environment and figure out a Pareto chart. Are they failing because of a deployment issue? Are they failing because of an environment issue? Are they failing because of a test issue? Or are you really finding code issues? I think that's one of the first steps is to get that Pareto chart, because you don't know whether you should go after improving your test automation, if you're really finding code issues and you can start by gating code and doing it, or if you really need to go to infrastructure as code because you've got so much instability, or deployment automation because you're manually deploying it and your environment's messed up because of that each time. So those are some of the things I look at. There's more details in my book, but the metrics just tell you where to go look and how to focus to take waste out. They're not, you can't just manage by metrics.
Francesco, any thoughts on that? You had mentioned things like time of delivery, deployment frequencies. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Every time that I start talking with the customer that they want to start DevOps, my first question is why you want to do DevOps? Because it's a new fashion, you want to improve your speed, yes, but why? I really believe that the only KPI that is not the metric, because metrics can measure the KPI, but the KPI that is motivating DevOps is the customer satisfaction. Because with the customer satisfaction, any company can make money. So to improve the customer satisfaction, of course, this is the business KPI. We have to improve a lot of technical KPI. That can be the quality of code, as Gary mentioned now. That can be the time to go in production. So let's say the time to market that is just in between business and technical KPI. So I really believe that regarding the KPI, starting from the customer satisfaction, what we have to do and what I usually do is try to link this business KPI to the technical KPI that can impact the business KPI that we want to really improve. And starting on that, at that point, you can start the transformation. Because if you, for example, can understand during your analysis that in IT you lose a lot of time in some step, you can push the automation in that specific step. If you understand that in another IT, the quality of software is poor because there are poor development, you have to act and improve that type of KPI. But any one of these must be linked to the business one. Otherwise, it does make no sense to win DevOps. Okay.
Ron, what's your thoughts on that? Anything you want to add to what Gary and Francesco already has done?
Yeah, I agree. You can live and die by the metrics, but I look at it more from the operational side as more of a feedback. As we talked about earlier, as a feedback mechanism. Because a lot of times you'll have software that'll work perfectly in that sterile test environment you have, but once you implement it and it gets into the ops side of things, you may see something completely different. So, some of the things like your system availability, your response times, maybe some basic server metrics that you can feed back to maybe say where there may be some bottlenecks as it operates in a more diverse and unregulated environment.
Yeah. And regarding the feedback, I can even spend some other words because in all the analysis that we see today, made by Forrester or Gartner, the final users, we as person, we don't want only an application that works correctly. We want an application that gives us good emotions. So how can you measure not the customer satisfaction in terms of emotions, the emotion that the application gives to me because I like it, so I use it, otherwise I delete from my mobile, etc. You can measure the emotion only by feedback. Feedback that must be measured by tools. How do I use an application? I give you an example. There are some applications that has some functionality that no one uses at all. And only if you have a tool that can help you to understand which are the functionality used by the final users. At that point, you can understand if they like it or not, or if they spend a lot of time in that specific part of the application, you understand that they like it or not. So feedback is again crucial, just to improve the emotion that we can give to the customer with the new tools that we develop for that.
Yeah, that brings up another point too. Like the feedbacks, you could also do like frequency analysis. It's like Francesco was talking about. We can actually, if we do properly the metrics, we can actually show how the application is being used, and use that as a feedback from resources as to where to apply more resources to implement certain functionality and features.
Makes sense. Since we're running, close to the hour, let's just jump quickly through the last few questions. How can you continuously improve the DevOps culture, and can you take DevOps beyond your IT organization? Gary, any thoughts on that?
I think it is a journey, and one of the most important things you can do is, commit to what you're going to do in an iteration and hold checkpoints on an ongoing basis and continually improve.
I like that. Francesco, anything you have to add to that? Francesco, you might be on mute.
Yeah, this is Ron.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I was on mute.
Yeah.
And I agree with Gary. And as I mentioned before, a lot of companies, they are adopting the DevOps transformation like a journey in the agile way. So in any iteration, they start to reanalyze with the steps that they can improve.
Oh, fantastic. Ron, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I'm just saying I agree with Gary too. It's just the one thing about DevOps is nothing in IT is static, and so DevOps lends to a culture of change. Right.
So quickly jumping into our last question: how important is automation in DevOps? Ron, you want to take that?
Yeah, I see that as a key component of DevOps, just creating your build pipelines just to make things reproducible and in a standardized way. So I see, to use like a military analogy, it's a force multiplier. It allows you, so these people that are 150, 200% booked, it allows them to move things over so that they can take some of those things off their plate and deal with the other more pressing items.
Makes sense. Francesco, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a key component. It's the component that gives the much impact because you can really demonstrate that you save a lot of time. But it's not the only component that we mentioned before. There are more, others that are really important. But if you want to start and you start with automation, you can easily demonstrate the advantage that you have with DevOps to the other teams. But then you have to proceed with other suggestions that DevOps gives.
Absolutely, Gary. Anything you want to add to that?
It takes variability out of environments and deployments in the testing process, and it enables you to go to smaller batch sizes. So it is important, and you need to get it, but you also need to be driving the cultural change and embracing it. I've seen a lot of people do test automation for years, but they've never gated code with it, so it's not stable and reliable. Test automation is one of the most important things you can do to transform how you do software development, and it's the thing that's most frequently done wrong. So unless you're using test automation to gate code, as an example, you're not getting the benefits that it was designed to go after. And if you've got long-running manual tests, I don't know how you get down to smaller batch sizes and release on a more frequent basis.
That makes absolute sense. In respect of everyone's time, we're at the top of the hour, so I'll just quickly wrap up this webinar. And again, thank you everyone for joining. And gentlemen, it has been a true pleasure to have you guys as panelists and gain valuable insight on DevOps. This has been a very, fascinating and learning experience for myself as well, and very beneficial. I hope this webinar discussion was beneficial for our DevOps SIG community, who we have organized this for to add value to our community that we're planning on growing. So if you're not already a DevOps SIG member, please go ahead and join, and look forward to more events coming up. And if you have any feedback on this event or any future events that you'd like to see for us to organize, please reach out, and we would love to see what we could provide for you. So with that said, these are some upcoming Vivid webinars. There's an exciting new one coming up on November 21st on quality application development with predictive insights, and November 28th on Storm Runner Functional, the ultimate key to unlocking UFT for parallel cross-browser testing. So with that said, we'll just wrap up today's event. Thank you all. Please complete the short survey and provide your feedback to Vivid and your DevOps special interest groups. If you're not already a member of the SIG, please join the following. Please join by clicking using the following link below. So with that said, my name is Syed Hussain. Thank you all for joining today. I look forward to speaking to you guys again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.